when we think about scope management, the basis for some of what we're talking about today is coming from chapter 5 of the PMBOK guide. Realize, though, most of my questions are not direct quotes of what's in the PMBOK guide, but it's taking what's in the PMBOK guide and my practical experience and other publications and putting that information in the form of sample questions. So here we have the processes of scope. You can see some of them are in purple boxes, some of them in blue boxes. The purple boxes, you tell me which process group are the purple processes coming from. So the purple processes are part of what process group? Great, the purple processes are part of planning. And then also I'll call this blue or teal, but let's say blue. Where are the blue processes coming from? Blue processes are part of monitoring and controlling. Great. So let's look at each of these processes. And I tell us we don't need to memorize outputs. And now I'm going to ask you about outputs. When you think of the process plan scope management, what are the two management plans that are outputs of plan scope management? So great, the requirements management plan and the scope management plan. So that's great. So remember, there's two plans that come out of plan scope management. Let's go to collect requirements. Collect requirements has two outputs. Can you name either or both of the two outputs of collect requirements? Okay, so great. The RTM, meaning the requirements traceability matrix. And what's the other output of collect requirements? Great, requirements documentation. It's requirements documentation and it's requirements traceability matrix. When we go to define scope, there's multiple outputs. What would you say is the primary output of defined scope? Great, so the primary output of defined scope is the scope statement, which sets the boundaries, what's in scope and what's out of scope. When you go to create WBS, what would you say is an output of create WBS? So the primary output of create WB8, okay. So not the deliverables. The primary output of create WBS, the scope baseline. And the scope baseline would include the scope statement, which we created in define scope, as well as the WBS and the WBS dictionary. So again, out of create WBS, we get the scope baseline, including the scope statement from define scope, but also the WBS and the WBS dictionary. When you think about validate scope, what do we call the deliverables that come out of validate scope? Great, out of validate scope, we call the deliverables accepted deliverables. And if the deliverables don't get accepted, what gets created? So if the deliverables don't get accepted, we have change requests created. Great. Out of control scope, There's multiple outputs here. If you had to summarize them or group the outputs of control scope, any comments about outputs of control scope? What would that be? Okay. So out of control scope, we have change requests, we have work performance information, we have project management plan updates specifically related to the scope baseline, but others, we have project document updates. So we talked about the outputs of each of these processes. I could have done the same thing with tools and techniques. So let's take 2 examples and then we'll move on. When you think about these 6 processes, which of these processes has inspections as a tool and technique? So inspections are a tool and technique of which process listed? So I'm seeing a lot of people list. So we're seeing different answers here. So first, let's break down. When you think about inspections, do we do inspections during planning, the purple, or during monitoring and controlling, the blue? So great, inspections will occur during monitoring and controlling. Does everyone agree that these planning processes would be wrong? So inspections occur during monitoring and controlling. Do we inspect? Or you tell me, what do we inspect? Do we inspect deliverables or do we inspect processes? Great, we inspect deliverables. That's the right answer. So which process, validate scope or control scope, relates to inspecting deliverables? Validate scope. Let me ask my question again. In which process, validate scope or control scope, do we inspect deliverables? Or does someone inspect deliverables? It would be during validate scope that we inspect deliverables. And we don't actually inspect the deliverables. You tell me in what process, who inspects the deliverables as part of validate scope? Great, it would be the customer or a rep of the sponsor. Okay. So that's great. So I see a comment, and let me ask the question again. Do we inspect deliverables or do we inspect processes? Which would be the better answer in the PMBOK guide? Do we inspect deliverables or do we inspect processes? We inspect deliverables. What would be a different word we would use in relation to processes? It wouldn't be inspect, it would be, and great from Sri, we audit processes. So that one idea could help you with multiple questions on the PMP exam. Associate the word inspection with deliverables. Associate the word audit with processes. Everyone okay on that idea? We inspect deliverables. We audit processes. So let's apply that idea to a different question, and then we'll move on to my sample questions. When you think about the process manage quality, you think about the process control quality. Which one of those processes, manage quality or control quality, has inspections as a tool and technique? Control quality as inspections as a tool and technique because we inspect the deliverables to see if we built them correctly. So that was great from a few of you. Control quality has inspections as the tool and technique. Manage quality. So in manage quality, would you expect the tool and technique to be inspections or audits? Audits, because a part of manage quality relates to improving our processes. So that was a side note. We got a little distracted there, but it's an important topic for the exam, inspections versus audits. Let's move on now to some sample questions. The following includes project approval requirements and project exit criteria. So whenever you're ready, type your answer into the chat area. So I'm seeing A's and I'm seeing D's, and now I'm seeing a C and back to an A. So when I look at the question, what might you say is a keyword or phrase in the question? Okay, the word approval from Shri. And then from Anne, like Anne's answer even better, project approval, I think is the key phrase in the question, though I might say project exit criteria is a keyword or phrase in the question also. Since the focus in the question is on the project and not on the deliverables, project approval. It doesn't say deliverable approval. It doesn't say deliverable acceptance. Where do we list project approval requirements? Let's look at the 4 choices. The scope statement would list acceptance criteria, but it's not acceptance criteria for the project. What acceptance criteria would be in the scope statement? The scope statement would contain acceptance criteria for the deliverables, so A is wrong. The work breakdown structure is a hierarchical decomposition of deliverables. It has nothing, it does not include approved requirements. The requirements documentation takes the needs of the stakeholders and turns them into requirements. But again, this still is not project approval requirements. It's the project charter. So if you found this a question, I'd go to the PMBOK guide, I'd go to section 4.1, I'd look at the output project charter, and I'd skim the list of bullets, what's included in the project charter. For me, though, the key word or phrase in the question was project approval. At the project level, we go back to the charter. Okay. Your planning team is working on developing the project scope statement. What must have been developed before the scope statement? So I'm seeing mostly D's here, not all D's. What would you say is a key word or phrase in the question? Okay, maybe must have. And maybe another key word or phrase is developed before the scope statement. So you tell me, do we think about scope first or schedule first? I would say we think of scope first. So the schedule would be after the scope statement. Now the work breakdown structure does relate to scope, but which one would be created before the other? Does the scope statement come first or the WBS come first? Which comes before the other? Great, the scope statement comes before the WBS because the WBS were breaking down the key deliverables listed in the scope statement. Let's go to C at cost baseline. Which one should we think about first, scope or cost? Great, scope comes before cost. The only one that's left is the charter. Any other comments about a keyword phrase in the question that might have helped you know that charter is the best answer? Okay. So for me, a keyword in the question that might have helped me maybe in a different way is the word planning. It says that it's my planning team. Okay. And the charter is developed during initiating. So initiating occurs before planning. So it'd be another idea that would help me. Your project is to design the latest built-in sensors to be used in automobiles. It's been suggested to use lateral thinking as we develop the scope statement. Lateral thinking is solving problems through an indirect and creative approach using reasoning that is not immediately obvious. Lateral thinking is an example of what data analysis technique. So I'm seeing mostly C's. Comments from anyone? What would be a keyword or phrase in the question? So I'm seeing a few different ideas on keywords. Maybe lateral thinking is a key phrase. It says we're developing the scope statement. So that tells me the right answer has to be a tool and technique of defined scope. Okay. Then the question describes lateral thinking. If you've never heard of lateral thinking, maybe some of these other phrases, indirect, creative approach. Okay. And then it says it's a data analysis technique. So for me, there's a few different tools and techniques. Let's take the answers one at a time. When you look at answer A, expert judgment, how do you know expert judgment must be wrong? Because it's not a data analysis technique. Everyone okay why expert judgment has to be wrong? Because it's not a data analysis technique. When I look at answer B and C, they're both data analysis techniques. So it could be B or C. How do you know answer D is wrong? Because facilitation is not a data analysis technique. So everyone okay with that? Now we're left with C and D. I said it wrong, I'm sorry. Now we're left with B and C. They are both data analysis techniques. So now I have to ask lateral thinking, is it a product analysis technique or an alternative analysis? I read its description, and I think it fits more with an alternative analysis than product analysis, though we'll come back to product analysis in a later question. Oops. So, okay, how I went about solving this problem. First, I eliminated A and D because they're not data analysis techniques. And then I asked with this idea, does it sound more like product or alternative analysis? Talk about some tools and technique ideas for a minute. The previous question was about data analysis. A wrong answer was product analysis. A wrong answer was an example of an interpersonal skill. We didn't have any wrong answers today yet that were decision-making techniques. If you go in the back of the PMBOK guide, I don't have my book in front of me right now, but there's a table. It's in one of the appendices, and it lists examples of data analysis tools versus product analysis, etc. I think that's an extremely important table in the back of the PMBOK guide. Does anyone have the page reference or the table reference? I don't have it with me. Anyone have that page reference? I think it might be page 686, I'm guessing. I don't have my book with me. But it's in the back of the book. It's a table with tools and techniques, and it lists the different tools and techniques. Oh, so I did have the right page. Yes, so thank you, Cindy and Shri. So it's a categorized an index of the tools and techniques. Really important few pages of the PMBOK guide. So if it was me, I would look at, as an example, the data analysis page, and I would look at each tool and technique there and ask why I would use one tool versus another. I'm going to keep going. You have taken over a project for another project manager. You see your technical people using such tools and techniques as value engineering and value analysis. These tools and techniques are examples of if you don't know the right answer, eliminate the wrong ones. So I'm seeing B's and a couple C's. When I look at the question, I know the right answer has to be a tool and technique, and we're talking about value engineering and value analysis. What's the easiest answer to eliminate? So I'm talking about a wrong answer now. So I think expert judgment is easy to eliminate. Oops. And I got it. For me, I think decision making is easy to eliminate. So now I'm left with product engineering and data analysis. How would I know the right answer? I might know the right answer because I've studied the table around page 686. The best answer here is product analysis. So value engineering and value analysis are examples of product analysis. Does everyone at least understand why A and D are wrong? Okay, great. So let's talk about these. Okay, so I have another sample question on the same topic, and then I'll explain value engineering and value analysis. So it's the next slide where I explain these terms. As you're defining scope, your team members are arguing about the use of value engineering and value analysis. Which statement below is true? Whenever you're ready, go ahead and answer your question. So usually this is a really hard question. Looks like most, if not everyone, is selecting answer C. How do you know that answer B and D both must be wrong? And I think we're hearing the same thing from everyone. Answer B and answer D mean the same thing as each other. B says value engineering comes before, D says value engineering, or B says value analysis comes before, D says value engineering comes after. So that makes sense that B and D have to be wrong because they are the same answer. And you will see that more than once on your exam where we can eliminate two answers because they're saying the same thing in different ways. So now we're left with A and C. They both begin with value engineering. So A says value engineering is about an existing product. C says value engineering is about a product in design. And based on your answers, everyone or almost everyone said C was the better answer. So let's talk about these terms for a minute. So value engineering is used in design. Value analysis is used in manufacturing. The ideas of both is pretty similar, though. How do we obtain the best value for the lowest cost? Okay. So Razi, I said, is saying, can it not be used for existing products? Okay. In general, Razi, when we compare value engineering to value analysis, in general, value engineering is used in design before the product has moved into manufacturing. Once the product has moved into manufacturing, we usually call it value analysis. So some of you I know right now are swearing at me maybe and saying, Aileen, this isn't in the PMBOK guide. I would agree with you. It's not in the PMBOK guide. I'm guessing, and I'm going to say about half your questions are in content that's not explained in the PMBOK guide. This is why when you come and use my materials, Don't just use my sample questions. Make sure you go through all my videos, because it's my videos that are going to get at the differences here. So don't just use my sample question database. Go to my videos. The project scope statement includes. So whenever you're ready, select your answer or type your answer into the chat. So I'm seeing mostly D's. And I'm noticing too, we have 28 people on the call, and I know a couple of you are probably calling in as you're driving, so you can't type. But most of you are truly using the videos here. So I'd ask you to select an answer, meaning commit. But let's get to the question. The scope statement includes. Answer A says project purpose or justification. So answer A, the purpose or justification of the project. Where do we list the project purpose or justification? Okay, so the purpose or justification of the project is listed in the charter. Therefore, it's wrong. B, high-level requirements. Where do we list high-level requirements? In the project charter. So B is wrong. C, high-level project description. If we have a high-level project description, where would it be listed? In the charter. So A, B, and C are wrong. D, acceptance criteria for deliverables. That would be listed in the scope statement. So some of you are saying, no, this contradicts an earlier question. It doesn't. The key word in answer D is the word deliverables. Okay, so acceptance criteria for deliverables are in the scope statement. Approval criteria for the project would be in the charter. So here I talk a little bit about the scope statement. Why is it important? It documents the entire scope. I like to list explicit scope exclusions, meaning what are examples of things out of scope. We use it to help with more planning. We might use it to help us understand if requested changes are in and out of scope. Okay. The project scope statement includes all of the following except. So whenever you're ready, type your answer into the chat area. So it looks like this was an easy question. The scope statement includes all of the following except. Answer A is project objectives. You tell me, where do we list the project objectives? The objectives are listed in the project charter. That's great. So that's the exception, the scope description, the project exclusions, the project deliverables. These would all be in the scope statement. Your project is to develop the next generation of heart monitoring implants. You have over 1,000 stakeholders representing dozens of organizations. Each stakeholder has his own idea on requirements. At this point, your team is working on selecting the final project requirements from all the requirements documentation. Most likely you are in what process? This is the trickiest question that I have today. I'm telling you that right now. So whenever you're ready, type your answer into the chat. Okay, so when I look in the chat area, I'm seeing B's and C's and D's, no A's. So no one selected answer A, and you're correct. So how do we know that answer A is wrong? Well, answer A is scope. So I'm hearing from multiple people, okay, that A is wrong because scope is not a process. So if we look at keywords in the question, for me, a keyword in the question is the word process. Answer A, scope is a knowledge area. So answer A must be wrong. Along the same lines, what's another answer that must be wrong? Okay, D, planning must be wrong. And how do you know planning must be wrong? Because planning is not a process, planning is a process group. So let's be real clear here. A, scope is wrong because scope is a knowledge area. D, planning is wrong because planning is a process group. So the only processes listed are answer B, collect requirements, and answer C, define scope. So now I go back to the question to help me decide, is it B or C? It says at what point your team is working on selecting the final project requirements. So in which process is it collect requirements, or is it define scope, where we select the final product or project requirements? It would be define scope. Again, I think this is the hardest question of the day. During collect requirements, we come up with our initial list of requirements, but then it's during define scope that we decide which of those requirements will be included in the project and which one would not. That's a tricky question. You and your team have selected the final project requirements and developed the scope statement. What are you likely to do next? I'm seeing mostly C's, though not all C's. It says we've just selected the final project requirements in the scope statement. So what process are we leaving? We're great from Sri. We're leaving the process define scope. When I look at the four choices, develop the schedule, estimate costs, create WBS, and define activities, all of them occur after define scope. So the question is then really which one occurs next? When you look at these four, which one would occur first after define scope? So of the four, which one would we do first? So I'm seeing A's and C's and D's. So we have just defined scope. The next thing we want to do, so I'm putting a 1 there, is create the WBS. So the scope statement would list high-level deliverables. Now we're going to decompose those deliverables into more detailed deliverables. So create WBS would come next on this list. Once we've created the WBS, from the three that are left, what would come after that? What would come after create WBS? What would come next is define from the list is we're going to take the deliverables of the W. Okay, so Shri, from the list that we have here, we would take the deliverables of the WBS and then we would define the activities. From the two that are left now, A and B, which one would come next? So just from this list, then we would develop the schedule from this list, and then after that we would estimate costs. So does the sequencing make sense here? We do the scope statement, and then the first thing we do after that is create our WBS. And then from this list, we define the activities. There's things missing on my list: sequence activities, estimate resources, estimate durations. But then we develop the schedule. Again, there's things missing from my list, like planning for cost. But from the list, we would estimate cost. So does this make sense to everyone how to solve this problem? Okay. For this problem, you have to make sure that you are studying by process group. You want to be studying by process group. Do not study by knowledge area. Now we're doing sample questions coming from a knowledge area, but as you study, you need to study by process group. This is how you get questions right that ask what would you do next or what would you do first. You're the project manager for a small manufacturing company. You manufacture medical devices that have dozens of applications to treat many life-threatening conditions. Tomorrow you are scheduled to hold a quality function deployment, QFD, to help determine critical characteristics for the new product you are developing. You begin your QFD by collecting customer needs, often called the voice of the customer. This is an example of A. So whenever you're ready, type your answer into the chat. Okay, so Ravi, I'll get to your question in just a minute, Ravi. So here we have people asking A or answering A and B and C and D. So we have answers coming. People have selected all 4 answers. So when I go to the question, for me, a key phrase is a QFD. We're trying to determine the critical characteristics. We're collecting customer needs. We want to hear the voice of the customer. Does anyone know what process are we in? So what process are we in? Okay, so that's great. From many of you, we're in the process collect requirements. So some of you are more familiar with the term a JAD session. So often we use JAD sessions in software. A QFD is a similar idea, but we use it in manufacturing. Does that help anyone? So it's a meeting of experts. So great. It's a meeting of experts, and it's a very technical meeting of experts. for picking requirements, and I'm going to use the word for developing or creating requirements. Okay. So first, okay, so we're getting closer. Based on that phrase, it's a meeting of experts, and it's a very technical meeting for developing requirements. So experts, very technical. Any answer you might eliminate based on some of those words? So now we're talking about wrong answers. Okay, so interview is a wrong answer. Can someone tell me, how are you sure that interview is a wrong answer? Good, because from Razi, great. Interviews are one-on-one. Okay. This is a meeting of experts. So everyone agrees C has to be wrong. Okay. And then D, group creativity techniques. I think we all know that one's wrong because the meeting is very technical. So now we're left with A and B. Again, let's go back to what we know about QFD. It's a meeting of experts. It's a very technical meeting. In this meeting, we're trying to develop requirements. So I'm coming back to you. Is it A or is it B? Okay. So we're seeing A's and we're seeing B's. Okay. So the answer we want here is it's a facilitated workshop. So in the PMBOK guide, under facilitation, they talk about QFDs being used in manufacturing. They talk about JAD sessions being used in software. They talk about, I don't have my book, so I don't know what else they talk about. Okay. So I see a question, so I'll get to that question in just a minute. Okay. So what's the difference between a facilitated workshop and a focus group? From PMI's perspective, so great from Sri, page 145, in the facilitated workshop, we are working together with experts developing the requirements, versus in a focus group, we're putting something out there that's already been developed and we're asking for their opinion. So my suggestion, if this is new to you, if you struggled with A and B, go to the PMBOK guide and read about focus groups, and then read the whole section on facilitation in this area, and see if that helps you realize that A is the better answer than B. So someone asked a question, where in the question do I tell us that, does it tell us that it's a group of experts? It doesn't. So I'm telling you that when we do QFDs, it's a group of experts. And someone else told us that too. I can't remember who said it. Okay. And I'm telling you that it's a meeting with multiple people. The question doesn't tell us that, but it is a meeting with multiple people, and that's why C is wrong. So let's do one more slide, and then we'll start wrapping up for today. Oops, I got ahead of myself. Project requirements and project failure. To decrease the chance of failure, we want to have early and frequent involvement with our stakeholders. We need this to make sure that we accurately collect requirements. On some projects, on the exam and in real life, we meet the requirements, but the projects still fail because we have the wrong requirements, or because we collected the requirements from the wrong stakeholders, or for many other reasons. Okay. So there's another question, and there's another one earlier I didn't answer. Okay. It says, could you explain one more time, okay, the idea of focus groups, or focus groups versus a facilitated workshop? from the PMBOK guide perspective, with a focus group, often we've already developed something and we take it to the focus group to get their opinion. So as an example, maybe I've already created a new PMI ACP course, and then I would take it to a focus group and ask them what do they think of it. That's a focus group. Different is a facilitated workshop where I work with a group of experts to determine the requirements for the PMI ACP course. Does that help a little bit, focus groups versus facilitated workshops? And I'm talking about the difference from an extreme point of view. Often with a focus group, we're getting their feedback on something we've already developed so that we can improve what we've already developed. So as an example, I am developing a PMI and ACP course, and as I'm developing it, I'm using focus groups to get people to tell me what they like, what they don't like. So by the time I release it, I already know it will be accepted in the market. So, and I still know there was another question I didn't get to yet, but to help me develop better sessions, any comments on lessons learned? So from a content standpoint, any comments on what you learned today? Okay, so the idea of inspecting deliverables and audit processes. Different processes and when to use them. So Cindy, can you be more specific on the several points you learned, or at least on one point? What I'm trying to do is get better every time I facilitate a session like this. Okay, so focus groups versus facilitated workshops. So that was a good takeaway. Okay, so that's great. Okay, so there was another question earlier, and the question was, how do you study by a process group? So comments from anyone, how do you study by a process group and not by knowledge area? Okay, so you go to page 25 of the PMBOK guide, and you go down the columns. That's how you study by process group. Okay. So there's many people on the call today who are not using my online material. So my online material always is set up by process group. So you saw one video today. I have over 200 online videos in my online self-study area. I have over 2,000 separate sample questions. So anyone who's using my online material, any comments from the people any comments to the people who are not using it? If you're not using my online material, I would go to my website, aileenellis.com, and at the top, find PMP self-study, and then it will tell you, it will give you the link to join my self-study, my PMP self-study membership area. So again, you saw one video today. I have well over 200 videos in my self-study area. What you saw today was process or knowledge area focused. All my other videos are process group focused. So all my material is organized by process group. Okay. So comments, what would you like to see next week? Any requests